So 15.2 is all about sex-linked traits. So we've already talked about this a lot, but let's just breeze through it quickly. So, and it talks about sex determination. So in humans and a lot of other animals, the gender of the offspring is determined by the chromosomes. You probably realize that already. So in humans and other mammals, there's two sex chromosomes, an X and a Y. The X one is much larger. The Y contains very, very few genes. And these are constituted as a homologous pair. They don't carry the same information, talked about this last chapter, but they're still homologous because they line up during meiosis 1 and they separate during anaphase 1. The ends of them, the ends of the X and the ends of the Y, are homologous. You can find the same genetic information at the beginning and at the ends. That way they can find each other during meiosis. Otherwise they would never be able to pair up, and then we would end up with some gametes having an X and a Y and some gametes having nothing, and it would just be a big, big mess. And so the different information that they carry, the X carries random genes that don't necessarily have to do with sex determination. Some of them do, but some of them have to do with colorblindness or hemophilia or another disease called Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And so those are located on the X chromosome, or they're genes that affect those things. On the Y chromosome, there's it's very small compared to the X. I'll show you the picture. No. It's very small compared to the X. There's the Y, there's the X, because it really contains one important piece of information, and that is called the SRY gene. The SRY gene stands for the sex-determining region of the Y chromosome, so sex-determining region of the Y chromosome. And all it really is a gene that, when activated, turns on all the male genes that are located throughout every single other chromosome. So you have genes for both genders, but they're just turned off depending on which gender you are. So if you're a female, the male genes are not turned on. If you're a male, the male genes are turned on. You're going to be male instead of female. So that's what the SRY gene does. That's kind of the only important thing that the Y chromosome does, is it just tells the rest of your genes to only make the male proteins. So the other things that are on the Y chromosome are a couple of other genes that are only activated in the male reproductive organs. About half of them are expressed only in the testes. So there's not that much information on the Y chromosome. You know that females are XX, males are XY, and each egg, ovum, contains an X, because your mother only has X's, so she can only give you X's, but your father's sperm could have an X or a Y, because they have an X or a Y to give. So the male is actually the gender that determines, the male is actually the parent that determines the gender of the offspring. Females are given an X no matter what. If you get a sperm that has an X from your dad, you're going to be female. If you have a sperm that has a Y from your dad, you're going to be male. So the male is the one that does the gender determination in our XY system. A lot of other mammals use chromosomes for gender determination, but they don't necessarily use the XY system. So here's humans. We use the XY. You know this. There's the X0 system, which is used by grasshoppers, cockroaches, and some other insects. And basically, females are XX and males are X nothing. So it's called the XO. They only have one X chromosome, and that determines for them to be male or not. In chickens, in birds, fish, and some insects, the sex determination is done by the female. So the male has two of the same, a perfect homologous pair of sex chromosomes, and the female has a Z and a W. We call them different chromosomes because X and Y was already taken. So this is the ZW system. So females are ZW and males are ZZ. In the haplodiploid system, there's no sex chromosome, but instead what it is if you are diploid, meaning you came from a fertilized egg, you have two copies of each chromosome, you're a female. And if you're haploid, meaning you did not come from a fertilized egg, then you are a male. So bees and ants use that. So males have no father. Females do, but males have no father. And so a gene that's located on either the X or the Y, or if you're a chicken, on the Z or the W, those are called sex-linked genes because they are on the sex chromosomes and they are affected by the gender of the organism. And so genes on the Y chromosome are called Y-linked genes. There's not very many of those. There's a lot more X-linked genes that are on the X chromosome. So, like I said, the X chromosome has a lot of genes that aren't really related to gender, like baldness is on the X chromosome, colorblindness is on the X chromosome, but the Y chromosome has a lot more sex determination traits on it. And X-related genes follow a very specific pattern of inheritance. We talked about this already, but basically, a female, if there's an X-related trait, the female needs 2 copies. They need to be homozygous for it to be expressed, because if they have a dominant copy, it's not going to show up. A male only needs 1 copy, because if you have 1 recessive trait, there's no dominant to cover it up, and you're going to see it. And this is called hemizygous. So we have homozygous, heterozygous, and hemizygous. So that hemi means half. So you have half of the pair. And X-linked recessive disorders are much more common in males than females because they only need to get 1 copy. So here are all the different crosses you could have. So take a look at those. And then some of the diseases that are caused, or some disorders that are caused by X-linked traits in humans are colorblindness. We know that. There's a couple of different color blindness, but the most common is X-linked red-green color blindness, which in males, they have a hard time distinguishing between red and green lights. And then there's also Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which is a progressive weakening of the muscles and loss of coordination, and they usually die by their early 20s, and that's an X-linked trait. So it happens much more likely in men. It almost never happens to females because these men, for a female to have this disease, they need to get it from their mom and their dad. And so the males almost never live to reproduce in this case, so they never pass it on, so girls never get it. Then there's also hemophilia, same thing. Much more common in males, and because it's on the X-linked trait. Hemophilia is an inability to clot, and so you bleed much more than you should. Then there's something called X inactivation, and this happens in female mammals. So basically, females, we have 2 copies of the X chromosome. So that means, remember that genes located all on the chromosome are making proteins. And so in women, we would have twice the amount of gene product from our X chromosomes as males, because we have 2 chromosomes making those genes. We're going to talk about the process of that in a couple chapters, but basically, we would have twice as many proteins from our X chromosomes as males. And so that could be a problem. We don't want to have that distinction between genders because these traits are not gender specific, right? Colorblindness or other things. And so what happens inside female mammals is one of their chromosomes becomes inactivated, and it's totally random, and it happens during embryonic development. So when you're still in the womb, it happens, or when you're still like just a couple cells, it happens. But it happens in every single cell. It could be different. It's determined when you're an embryo, but when you're an embryo, you're already a couple of cells, so there could be differences in your Barr body disactivation. And so the inactive X basically just condenses down really, really, really tightly so that it can't be made into any more proteins, it can't be accessed, and it's called a Barr body. Okay, so the inactive X is called a Barr body. This happens randomly, like I said, and so it can be different between different parts of the female body. And so if you're heterozygous at the X chromosome for a specific allele, one of those is going to be inactivated in different cells, so you're going to be a mosaic for that character. That means that some of your cells are going to show the dominant trait and some of them are going to show the recessive trait. The best example of this are Calico Cats. So the trait for fur color is on the X chromosome in cats. And so if you're heterozygous, you're going to have an allele for orange fur and an allele for black fur. And so in the different cells in your skin, some of them are going to have a deactivated X and some of them are going to have a deactivated Y. Some of them are going to have a different deactivated X's. So some of them are going to have a deactivated orange X, some of them are going to have a deactivated black X, so it's going to show up differently in their fur. These cells will be orange, these cells will be black, and it's totally random, and so they have a different pattern, they're different, so it's called a mosaic. And that is caused by a Barr body, which again is an inactive X found only in females. So only female cats are ever going to be calico.